chairman of the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance. It is 22 years old yesterday, so we're celebrating that. But our sole mission is to make this world and our nation safe from missile defense, from missiles. And you can see the world as we see it today, and the proliferation of that threat continues to evolve. And we must evolve with that. This is our 61st Congressional Virtual Roundtable. We're debuting our newest member, J.D. Gainey, on this, and we have a phenomenal topic. It is about Guam, what the heck is going on in Guam. I'm from the Pacific, and my grandfather was the chief medical officer for the British Empire under King George V and King George VI. He got a Order of British Empire for his service there by Queen Elizabeth. My great-great-grandfather was the chief of the Ngāi tribe in New Zealand, the largest tribe in New Zealand, the majority, probably 89% of the South Island. I'm embedded from the Pacific for an open, free Pacific. We are being challenged today, yesterday, tomorrow, by China in its tactics not to make the Pacific free, not to make the Pacific open, and has been going after islands in the Pacific, and just most notably, the Philippines. Their bullying tactics, their intimidation, their influence, and that may be the tripwire more so than what's going on in Taiwan. And Taiwan is being intimidated every single day. So the deterrent for the United States in the Pacific is its furthest territory in the Pacific. It's Guam. And that's where we were able to project force from our airstrip there, from our port there, from our submarine base there, for stability, for open and free Pacific. There's no doubt that Guam has to be defended. It has to be defended to ensure that we continue to have status quo the way it is today to do that. And Guam has to be defended against China. It has to be. So we've been part of this movement. And we go back to April 13th when we were leading the advocacy. We're a do tank, baby. We got in there on the 13th of April to put our first THAAD battery in place on Guam, which was a fight against North Korea. We've held 6 Missile Defender of the Year events in Guam over those years. And in 2016, 17, Harry Harris, the former commander of PACOM, moved the direction from North Korea to a China defense ask. And that came up through the Pacific Defense Initiative. And it's so fortunate, JD was part of that movement. Mark Montgomery was under Senator McCain's Senate Armed Service Committee that began to put forward that advocacy and got it in play. And Tom Goffis replaced Mark to a $4 billion infrastructure build for the defense of Guam. And that was in, I think, 2018, 2019 is when that, and JD, you'll clear that up on top of that. But here we are, and I was on the Hill a couple days ago and ran into the to the MILCOM subcommittee, and they're telling me, Riki, they said the bill for Guam is now at $60 billion. And I know we have a hurricane repair, but that is a far jump from $4 billion. And I know, so we got to get a little grasp on what is going on here, because that bill does not look to go down. It's only going to look to go up. And we're not going to walk away from this. We have to have the defense there. So we got to look at this, and it might not be the best picture, but we got to come to terms with this and figure out how best we can do it. We've heard the head of China, Xi, say he is ready. He wants his military force to be ready by 27 to take Taiwan. Last week, we saw a Mach 9 missile that was undefended going right into Israel. And that technology is coming from China. There has to be capabilities to defend against the best threats that China is developing and ahead of. In our Congress, we're not even funding a hypersonic glide defense or completing a hypersonic glide defense until the mid-30s. So we're building an architecture without that right now. I know you got to start places, but there's a lot of things here that are concerning, and then we got to get on the right track. So this is about clarity of what's happening in Guam by probably two of the best experts in the world on this particular subject that we have today. So this is our 61st capstone. I'm sorry, 61st virtual. And we have our newest member. And JD is a great addition. In 2018, he spearheaded the initial defense of Guam. JD has served to the aide to the director of the Commander's Action Group, and that is the former USINDOPACOM Admiral Aquilino. He's a senior national security advisor, the advanced technology analyst, and in these roles, he has created the Joint Mission Accelerator and Allied Sensor Integration Programs and co-authored the USINDOPACOM Integrated Air and Missile Defense 2028 vision. And he has supported the realization of the Caucasus Pillar 2. JD is a ship captain of an Aegis BMD, the Hopper. He's commander of that did some great testing on our SM-31Bs. And we are excited to have you aboard here, JD. And I want to hand you off to have a more articulate history of the Guam movement and enlighten everyone on the situation as you see it. Ladies and gentlemen, JD Gainey.
Thank you, Riki, for the kind introduction. Aloha, everybody. Admiral Montgomery, good to see you, sir. Be part of the team. You are kind of responsible for some of this stuff since you brought me back to INDOPACOM in 2017 after my tour on Hopper, and some of this magic has started. So let's just cut to the chase. In order to know where we're going and have a good understanding of where we are right now, we have to take a moment to look in the rearview mirror on how we got here and the principal underlying factors and decisions that got us to this place. So I would offer National Defense Strategy 2018 was a significant game changer, not just for the missile defense industry and enterprise, but specifically for INDOPACOM. It started changing the attitude and the approach with respect to how we conduct warfighting, how we pursue warfighting capabilities, how we field it, and how we employ it. The terms competition with China, competition with Russia started coming out in the National Defense Strategy 2018. There's an opportunity for the services to have a moment to pause and reflect on on their efforts, their concept of operations with respect to employment in the Pacific from that national defense strategy. And that gave birth to a few initiatives and few official programs from the services, like the multi-domain task force as an example, Marines expeditionary advanced basing operations, and the MLR operating concept. The Air Force started pushing toward agile combat employment and advanced battle management compute using open architecture, current tech software integration techniques, and applied that into the military domain. And all that originated from the National Defense Strategy 2018. Well, at the time when I was at INDOPACOM, we looked at what the services were doing to resource the fight specifically against China. And we looked across the board and we said, all right, we appreciate all these individual concepts, right? We as the JTF commander have to be able to put them all together into coherent effort and employ it. One of the main themes of that national defense strategy was execution of joint lethality, right? And you can't execute joint lethality without credible defense to be able to back it up. So what put before us the problem, or really the dilemma, is how can we take each one of these operating concepts that are biased toward putting warheads on foreheads to produce offensive capability, but all the while maintain some type of defense construct that can provide mitigation to force, mitigation to mission, and a mitigation to escalation, right? So we don't want to sit there and employ capabilities coming from the MDTF without some type of credible defense design. So the JTF commander at the time, we looked across the board and we started thinking, well, we need to create a construct where we bring all these different resourcing efforts and put it into some type of unity of effort. And what we did was, with OSD policy at the time, we identified 3 interdependencies that each one of these joint concepts relied upon each other to be able to execute successful missions in the Indo-Pacific, right? So the Army could not support their lines of effort without some type of enablers from the maritime environment and the air environment, right? So those 5 interdependencies. And we came out to 3 major ones: command and control, combined and sustained logistics, and also integrated fires. So let's just sit on integrated fires real quick. We intentionally looked at integrated fires, not from projection of power, but an entire construct of you have projection of power with credible defense. And we wanted to look through integrated fires, not from command and controlling, dictating how we resource those integrated fires, but let's look at technology that can make our integrated fires effort more feasible and more relevant, specifically focusing on the decision-making process. Right? Those that have been associated with joint commands know that decision-making process is measured in days, right? And due to the time, space, and the threat that NDS 2018 directed us to focus on, we had to change how we consumed and disseminated decision-making capability. So we went after integrated fires, and we wanted to look at technology enablers for integrated fires. And so in order to provide a use case, hey, Army, Navy, and Air Force, we can create an architecture where, or in a warfighting deployment model from one space, and one geographic space where all these things come into bear, and that was Guam. So when we start talking about the defense of Guam, the defense of Guam, or the Guam defense system, was never really about the integrated air missile defense, probability of kill against threats. This was part of a larger effort that if we can get Army, Navy, and Air Force, and in some cases, some capabilities from the Marine, to operate under a common construct to make command and control seamless and expedited, then we can step off. So that's kind of how we got to the original architecture for the Guam defense system. like I kind of said it already, you really can't have offensive power and power projection without some type of credible defense design. And so, so that's how we approach the initial construct, the demand signal to be able to beef up capabilities on Guam started a little bit before the National Defense Strategy. There was attention being brought out there starting in 2016 with the creation of PDI and some PACOM requests for support. But there was a progression of focus and shift of focus on, well, let's identify the threat, let's mitigate the threat, but let's mitigate the threat through a different construct. So that's kind of how we got to that point, Riki.
Yeah, JD, thank you. Can you move on what the threat is? Can you just talk a little bit about what the threat they're seeing on that and the capabilities that we are looking to defeat those threats from China?
Yep. This audience knows that China is well-versed and has well above average demonstration of deployment of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, maneuvering ballistic missiles, and even hypersonics. And you can even make the argument that they have capability to orbit the Earth with a FOB capability as well. So there's no doubt that China has demonstrated the capability to put our forces at risk from 100 miles to 1,000 miles to 2,000 miles. And the challenge is quite daunting. So this was the first time where we had to be able to create a construct from a joint perspective to be able to hit cruise, ballistic, and hypersonic threats all at the same time. I will acknowledge that the Navy started working on hypersonic defense through their sea-based terminal initiative with Missile Defense Agency a little bit before this. So they already recognized that the threat to the carriers through hypersonic, or the threat to even the Aegis combatants were at risk. So they started the program, and so Aegis at the time in 2018 was the only capability that was actively spending money and resources to go after all three threats. But we know that Aegis, the role of the Aegis is for the defense of maritime-based critical assets. So the dilemma was, well, how can we pick up content capability from what the Aegis system was providing at the time and put it into a construct that could be land-based and support land-based critical assets? And remember, this is the Pacific, right? So you have Guam with the geographic area. Rick, you'll appreciate this, from Candlestick Park to Cardinal Stadium in Palo Alto at Stanford. That's about the distance of what Guam is, and that area body, that area is the body of work of what Guam looks like. Those that have been to Oahu, Guam is 1/3 the size of Oahu. So, of course, in the middle of thousands of miles of ocean. So the dilemma starts introducing itself: is this a maritime problem set because the threats are originating and approaching from the maritime and space-based environment, or is this a land-based critical asset problem set? So at the very beginning, you started seeing arguments from those that resource these capabilities, the Army and the Navy, saying, "Hey, this is really our mission, or this really isn't our mission, but I agree there's technology here that could be carried over." So what we did is we just started articulating the requirement for some entity within DoD to resource it. And remember, the way we resource things in DoD and DoD 5000 is primarily through the Title 10 efforts. So Army, Navy, and Air Force, some agencies will be able to get a pot of money and then go out and spend it. Well, what we're asking to do is take some residual capability that we found that could be applicable for the defense of Guam, residual capabilities in the Aegis weapon systems, Mark 41 VLS, PAC-3 MSC weapon, Horizon space-based sensors. There's a little bit of components that are being fielded that we knew that if we picked up that residual capability, we turned a different way and we put it into a package that we can actually have and this is the requirement that we came by the time with: persistent and enduring 360-degree coverage integrated air missile defense coverage against the advanced threats, hypersonic, ballistic, and cruise missile. And that was the requirement that we stated at the time. The reason why we said enduring was because we have assigned forces in the Pacific for missile defense that have responsibilities elsewhere into the Pacific. So we can't bog down and tax the services, Army and Navy, for deployable defense design to stay on Guam. And persistent, right? It has to be available all the time. So it really kind of takes the Air Force out of play because they don't have the gas and so forth to be able to maintain those. So that was that was a requirement that we put into.
Okay, JD, just thinking through this, right? I mean, you've got the Air Force that can go get the shooters way in front of Guam and anything that's flying on the air or possibly on the water. So there is forward left of launch, but there is forward capability naturally inherent. And if we didn't have a defense of Guam, we'd probably park 4 Aegis ships around Guam to defend that. So that's a reality. I believe that's true, that we have air superiority to be able to control where those things launch from, closer to not from China, but closer in that. So that aspect's already there. The reason Guam is, I think, one of the things is we didn't want to put 4 ships in charge of it. We wanted to create a supplement defense capability there that would be able to layer that out from those other systems that are out there. And you also didn't talk about space, because space is an integral part of this. So just if you just comment on that.
Yeah. So to those points, and I kind of mentioned it. The way we defend Guam right now is we have to tax the Navy and the BMD and the Aegis destroyers to be able to provide tipping, queuing, and even engageability, right? We also have to tax the available minimum engagement package through Patriot to be able to deploy, right? But those are already baked into our campaigns. Well, with the National Defense Strategy 2018 prescribed and the operating concepts created an additional demand signal for dispersed operations throughout the Asia Pacific. So we were no longer just going to adhere to very specific centralized operating constructs. The idea was to get out and change the calculus for China. So let's provide more opportunities to project power from different locations. Well, you have to have an associated defense design with that. In order to do that, you have to have the ability to take the already assigned missile defense packages, either Air Force base, Army, or Navy base, to be able to go and support that. So the whole point behind the defense of Guam was to alleviate that tax on what's already available for the commander. And I will say at the time, we're talking 2008.
It's become more expensive. It's become ridiculously expensive.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So
I mean, you can do 30 Aegis ships for the cost of this right now.
Well, yeah, that's always fantastic. I'm sure the Navy would like that. But the reality is, in 2018, our very first response was, in order to do this problem, we have to take the line of sight and horizon out of the discussion. You got to go space. But at that point in time, it was too expensive and unachievable to be able to do space-based integrated air missile defense. I would offer, and we could talk about this at the end of us moving forward. I think we should go back and challenge that assumption, because what we're doing in space, what we're putting in space, the throughput that we have of capabilities going up in space should change the way we approach the defense of Guam, but not just the defense of Guam, really the defense of mobile critical assets or dispersed critical assets throughout the Asia Pacific. And just remember, Riki, and this is a different construct and a different problem set than you have in Europe and Africa and so forth. We're the Pacific is the only area of operation that is primarily based through the maritime environment, with land and air force and space supported on the periphery. Everywhere else it's either a land-centric or an air-centric effort, with the Navy supported on the periphery. So the idea behind what we do is, well, let's not throw capability or try to force capability to things that hasn't done. Let's go after how we approach and integrate and really define an architecture first before we start throwing sensors and weapons on top of it. And again, that was part of
Right.
the
So
original design coming from Guam.
are we doing that? Or are we doing it the other way around? Throwing the weapons first.
So if you look at the capability, if you look at the capability rollout for delivering content on Guam, I don't think the government's going to start looking at integration in architecture until 27. Which would be for us, it's like at the time, we're like, no, you go after the architecture first. And I'll give you an example, right, of a successful effort where you focus on architecture first and then you add the sensors and the effectors on it. And that's what the Australians did with their Air 6500 program. For those who aren't familiar, it's essentially how the Australians are jumping into the next generation of air warfare and air defense. And the very first effort that they went after, the Air 6500 program, was going after architecture, battle management, how they're communicating decisions, not just at the operational level, but promulgating those decisions out to the tactical edge. So, either you fit into this architecture, this data-rich centric architecture, and play within it, or you're not going to be considered. They progressed on. Air 6502, 6503 started adding expeditionary launchers, expeditionary sensors, air domain, space-based domain as part of that original foundation. So at the time, we're like, hey, let's take a lesson learned of something we know that works. And it's a good approach, especially having desperate type capabilities being nominated. So if you get after the architecture, you figure that out first. Yeah,
on all that, and the bridge with the three different services, with the with the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army. With that, let me just pass it.
Yeah. So you're reiterating the point. The JMTC bridge is software, right? It's about 85% software. So this is not a hard problem set to do the integration. There's just no resource or somebody in charge to go after the integration across the entire board. MDAA has that responsibility, but it's not going to be pursued till 27. So if this is a software problem, which it is, well, there's other entities within the Department of Defense that can take a swing at that pitch. The Chief Data AI Office is one. DIU is bringing some commercial software integration techniques that we have found through other initiatives being very successful as well. So I would just say that there's things that we can start accelerating right now that can do no harm. In fact, enable the delivery of content.
Okay, thank you, JD. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Mark Montgomery, who was a J3 for PACOM and who was on that Senate Armed Services Committee under Senator McCain that initiated that first $4 billion into the PDI. Mark?
Thanks. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about what went wrong. So I'd start out by saying, look, as much as I have fun sometimes talking about IFPC and IBCS and giving the Army a hard time, the original sin on this is the Navy. We had an option of putting Aegis ashore here. I think reasonably, having just done two of them in Poland and Romania, we knew the cost. It was a slightly different. It would be a slightly different Aegis ashore, but we were talking in the $2 billion range. I think they would have said it's 1.7 and delivered it at 2.5, but we're saying there, and it would have been ready around now. Clearly, we're nowhere near that. And why are we there? The Navy insisted on not having Aegis ashore. They had negative experiences from Romania and Poland. I think the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Richardson, might have said the Navy doesn't defend dirt. Well, I got some bad news for the Navy. They're defending dirt, right? They have some number of defensive Guam ships always on 24 up to 96 hour standby. They're routinely there defending Guam. We defend dirt. I think the other concern his successor CNO Mike Gilday might have had was, it's hard to man the crews. We have to use 3 crews to make one on a TDY rotational schedule into Romania and Poland. Well, Guam is a PCS. It's a PCS that I think a ton of Aegis sailors in both Yokosuka and in Yokosuka in Japan and Hawaii would have willingly taken. And so, what would have been, a 60 to 80 sailor team, manning a hypersonic, a ballistic and hypersonic missile defense system with a couple VLSs in 2 to 3 years, that didn't happen. So at that point, the Department of Defense, really under the leadership of CAPE, a Capability Assignment Office, not a Missile Defense Architecture Office, like that's known as the Missile Defense Agency. So the wrong people at OSD were assigned to this, and they successfully picked the worst possible solution. And what they picked was a distributed network. They said, we're going to defend this in a distributed way. The problem, of course, is at the heart of this was going to end up being an Aegis command and control system. And I'll just gently say, you can't distribute that. So you can move your hand fast, say there's going to be these launchers here, the radars and different panels here and all this kind of stuff. And you would end up with, you still have an Aegis command and control center that's a single point failure when it's hit by a missile. So everything I'm about to say is obviated by that single point failure. But the idea they had was, we're going to have a distributed network. We're going to put the SM3s and SM6s on trucks and fire them, because they're doing that with what's called precision strike missile, the off Tomahawks and SM6s. I would say that the original costing of that was inaccurate. I don't think that's the Army's fault. I think it's probably is JAMDO and CAPE's fault. JAMDO and Office of the Joint Staff, and CAPE, the Office at OSD. I think they asked the wrong questions, got answers they liked, and moved forward. But in any case, the trucks are going to have a bad time. In any case, it was a distributed network. The idea is we distribute all these different capabilities, capacities all over the island, make ourselves a tough target to hit. That's how the Army fights. I'll gently say the best service at missile defense is the Navy. And they probably should have hung out in the Navy architecture. And in the end, the anchor for this ballistic and hypersonic missile defense was going to be a Navy system, a Navy radar, Navy command and control system, probably a Navy launcher system. Should have hung out with that. They didn't. So I'll give you some goods and bads out of that. Some great decisions were made. One, they picked SPY-7, which is has a polarization diversity capability that means that as we get into the more sophisticated ballistic missile threats, it's going to outperform the SPY-6 in this very specific mission. I'm not arguing whether or not it should be on every Navy ship. Navy ought to take a look at that. But I'm telling you, for this very specific capability, this was a clear winner radar. So that's a good news thing. The bad news thing, they had this truck idea. Good news to correct that, Congress said, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And they told the Navy, or told the Department of Defense, buy 1 to 3 VLS. I think they're going to buy 2 VLSs. So at least have some missiles ready to shoot. Something else about the trucks. It means you got to create booster drop zones all over the island. Let me know what the governor of Guam says about that. I'll give you the short answer. What are you doing? Right? So, so good and bad there. Another bad is they kind of tried to hook everything to IBCS. IBCS may one day be the best missile defense, collaboration network ever, or air defense collaboration network ever. It's not today. It is very slowly integrating individual systems in on a set path that had solutions in the 2030s for many of the important systems. So the dilly-dallying with IBCS has not been that effective. And then another problem is this really changed the manpower going to distributed. If you had a Aegis ashore with 2 VLSs, that's 64 missiles. That's a ton of missiles. It's a SPY-7 radar. It's an Aegis command and control. That is the cutting edge. It's our best chance of defending Anderson Air Force Base and the submarine base in Guam from a hypersonic ballistic missile threat. If you had that, it would have cost you 60 to 80 sailors. Period. Full stop. The distributed network they're dreaming up has hundreds, if not 1,000 soldiers and sailors involved in it. When you do that, you then introduce MILCON. You got to get a commissary going. You got to get barracks going. You got to get exchanges going. Oops, we got to get a school going. All these kind of things kick in. Many senior officers have had to deal with this over time. That was going to be a challenge, and that's what's driving up the cost. I don't know what the real final cost is. but it's way over the 2 billion for that Aegis ashore. And I'll give you one more oops, right? In addition to this, you would have existing THAAD, existing Patriot. That's fantastic. That contributes more numbers, though. The THAAD doesn't because they're there, but the Patriot might. You still need this low-cost cruise missile system. And Congress has been telling the Army for a long time, you got to consider NASAMS. The Russian invasion of Ukraine's convinced everyone in the world except the U.S. Army that NASAMS is a pretty effective cruise missile defender. But the Army dug its heels in and said, we're going to deliver IFPC. IFPC's a system, the checkered past. It's fair to call it the Phoenix Suns of missile defense, always 2 years away from being 2 years away. By the way, they just got another delay. I'll just tell you, it's not even 2 years away now. I think it's 3 years away now from any kind of operational deployment. That'll be news to Congress because Army tends to tell Congress what it wants to hear, which is it's coming right now. But the problem with IFPC now is that it's so integrated into the IBCS, it's very hard to disaggregate it and use it as a standalone system, which I would love to have. I love the idea of IFPC sitting guard with a Sentinel A4 radar, sitting guard over the submarine base at Guam, being cued by the Spy 7 through a Link 16 signal saying, hey, look over there, buddy, something's coming. By the way, cued even better by an aerostat on a tether up at 10,000 feet. You know, kind of what the U.S. Army, what UCOM's doing in Europe, kind of what the Israelis do in the Negev. Again, kind of what the U.S. Army used to do to defend the National Capital Region until the J-Lens aerostat got underway. And after an incident in which no one was killed, the Army killed a system. So I'll just gently say, every chance we had to make a decision here, we kind of flopped on the wrong side. And Riki, I'm just going to step off and say right away, go ahead.
What is the solution, Mark? What is the solution? That we got all that stuff. Whatever, if you're not going to change that, how do we get forward and get this thing done? And can we do that by the timeline of 27 and get the right stuff in there quicker?
I'll give you a solution. It probably won't make 27 perfectly, but it'll be close. First, obviously, you have Superman spin the world backwards, go back 4 years, make some different decisions. I'll assume that's out of play, and I'll say, look, the very first thing is that we absolutely have to turn to the Navy and say, turn to the missile defense. We need to have a short-term solution and a long-term solution. The short-term solution, I can't just say put a pause on everything and stop. That's not realistic. We have a threat to our service members in Guam. We need to have the ability to get our submarines underway. And potentially later on come in for service and get in and out, get reloaded. We need to have Anderson for certain missions, even if it means it gets some damage on occasion, but recover it and go. So short term, it's get things going. MDAA, the Missile Defense Agency, take responsibility for making sure we have a functioning ballistic missile defense, hypersonic missile defense system anchored in the Spy 7 Tippy 6. Whether you decide to reduce some of the uncertainty in the manpower by bringing the Spy 7 into a traditional deck house, which it can absolutely do, or you want to keep them as, arrays spread across the island, I'll leave that to MDA and the Joint Task Force Commander there. But in any case, figure that out. I would tell you, if you want the Navy happier, put it in a deck house because it'll drop the numbers down over having the standalone arrays. Second, get your damn 2 VLS systems, Mark 41 VLS systems up and running, so you have 64 weapons there. Third, get your Aegis C2, built. It can work. Get Link 16 compatibility with the THAAD systems there. So what you do is you get that going. You take the existing THAAD systems so that that enhances your ballistic missile defense of the island. Talking through Link 16 to the Aegis, and the Navy needs to man it. Just shut up and man it. Stop trying to bag this on the Army. What this is going to do is release a bunch of destroyers from suboptimal duty defending Guam during a crisis when we need them defending aircraft carriers, conducting undersea war, ASW operations, shooting their maritime strike Tomahawks into the enemy. Get out of that mission and into Aegis ashore with the 60 to 80 sailors. The Army continue to do your good job providing THAAD, which you've been doing for years on the island, defending it alongside the Aegis ships. If you need to, if you can afford to get Patriot there, get Patriot there. Figure out how to get a low-cost cruise missile either through a standalone IFPC that's ready to go in 2025, or get NASAMS. You're in trouble there since the whole rest of the world figured out it was a good thing. I think Kronsberg out in Norway and Raytheon are backed up on NASAMS orders, and I'm sure we can cut the line a little. I wouldn't want to cut it in front of Ukraine, but we could do that. And then I agree with JD. Start sprinkling in some other ideas, whether it's they're not near space, but aerostats. I have a pit in my stomach about putting a Sentinel radar on a post. I think that's a risky typhoon challenged scenario, whereas an aerostat can be brought up and down and put in a hangar. But aerostats, think about how cyber and space support this. But realistically, Riki, I think they could describe what I just did. They could get that done in about 2.5 years. But it would mean that OSD has to admit they're wrong, not their long suit. You'd kind of have to push the Army to do what the Army does well, which is THAAD and Patriot, and force them into a cruise missile decision, low-cost cruise missile shooter. And then finally, you would have to tell the Navy, get over yourself. You're going to man an Aegis ashore. The sailors will not be unhappy. 60 to 80 sailors on PCS orders to Guam is not going to break any bank. In fact, I think you'll fill those easily with Yokosuka and Hawaii-based sailors. So, Riki, that's how I'd get at it. Like
so
you said.
Basically, you're going back to non-distributable because that one single point of failure with the hyper and the ballistic missile defense. The Army is the best in the world at construction on land and support, and that whole cruise missile defense mission, the counter UAS mission, can't be done on a single point of failure. It's got to be spread out like that. So it's great to have one part, but I don't think there's still a gap with the cruise missile defense, gap with the counter, gap with stuff coming in low and distributed.
So I guess you're asking me, do I want 90% done in 2 years at about a $4 billion cost, or do I want 100% done in 15 years?
That's a good argument.
At a $40 billion cost. I'm going to go with number one there. And I'll tell you something else. We have good targeteers. I'm sure the Chinese do too. I'll find your single point of failure in your distributed network. And if you're going to anchor yourself, and they will, for at least 2 decades in an Aegis-based system, that Aegis command and control system is going to be it. You're not going to figure out a way where IBCS has a THAAD controller could do the Aegis weapon systems job. I mean, you can write that on paper. You can put it in a PowerPoint. The OT&E on that is 10, 15 years out. Plus, by the way, we're not very interested. The Navy's not very interested in holding up, baseline developments to go down this rat hole with the Army on this. Okay. And the Navy's kind of done the worst of both worlds. Say, we're not doing Aegis ashore, and kind of like wave their hand at the Army when they talk about how they're going to integrate this on the island. The Navy's done the Army no services. Look, I think the Army's functionally anchored in the wrong idea here, but the Navy hasn't done well either. And the Air Force, of course, is just standing there saying, hey, aren't we the ballistic missile defense commander? Where's my B-2MC? Where am I in this bridge? Da, 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 da. And the answer to the question is you are, and we're not thinking about you. So look, what it's also preventing is innovative ideas like the aerostats, like passive decoys out, acoustic passive decoys out in the water, like using cyberspace technologies like JD got to. You can't even get to that stuff when you can't get the functional number 1, number 2, number 3 parts right, so you even have an effector-based system.
Okay, Mark, thank you. I want to go back to JD. JD, just can you explain the 60 billion? I know most of it's MILCON. How much of that 60 billion is for the system architecture for the shooters and the sensors and so forth?
Yeah, so
be that amount.
Yeah, so kind of like talking about what the current program of record, what's in it, what's out of it. Right now, what's being funded, and there's activity pressed against it is defining the command and control center on Guam. About 5 different Spy 7 Tippy 6s, are under procurement. I think 3 to 5 EOC equivalents for IBCS is being pursued. 3 different LTAMs. They're looking at modernization for THAAD and THAAD battle management. So that's kind of in the mix right now.
How much is that? Just for that, how much is that?
Yeah, you're looking in between 4 to $6 billion, depending on the modernization that the Army's seeking and the prioritization of bringing in C2BMC and THAAD into IBCS, and also accelerating LTAMs.
The remaining amount is we have to do for the MILCOM.
So yes, yeah. So I think it was 2020. We saw that there's going to be a battle for land in Guam, and we created INDOPACOM created JTF Micronesia. The idea was to have an overseer of all the different military construction efforts that's going on out there. Space Force is putting a lot of content out there. The Air Force is putting more content out there. The Navy is expanding. There's lessons learned from the typhoon that hit. Power resiliency needs to go in place. So the idea was JTF Micronesia was a senior level official, 1 to 2 star, to oversee all the activities and efforts on the Guam. Guam defense piece was a major widget of that overall effort. And I would sit there and say between 10 to 15 or 10 to 13 sites that are being nominated for this dispersed architecture on 30 miles by 4 to 6 miles wide piece of land. It's going to be significant MILCON, right? And that's just to get the weapon systems laid down, environmental impact statements. There's a preponderance of this initial cost. This $60 billion is to go after building the infrastructure to be able to support all this, not actually delivering the capability.
And this is power, right? You got all these you got to power that up. Is that correct? And so a lot of that is have we introduced or talked about small nukes to be able to power that are the cleanest energy producers, to start that precedent in doing kind of infrastructure powering? Is that even possible, or is that would reduce a considerable amount of that money?
Yeah, kind of like Admiral Montgomery was talking about, kind of like the Guam. It's not really a technical problem because small nuclear reactors are a real thing. It's implemented into that environment. So it's more of a political and local acceptance. Studies have been done, especially on Oahu, on how to use small nuclear reactors to be able to bump up the power consumption demands. Especially if we're thinking about putting data centers or even like real AI type compute, that sucks up a lot of power, right? In addition to all this RF generation from the different radars throughout. Not only that, when you're looking at dispersed architecture, you got to get that data piped around the island. So that's either underground fiber optics, that's above land. 5G resilient communications. There's multiple different approaches to do it, all of which come at a pretty significant cost, especially on Guam that's out there. So yeah, right now where we are, because of the design that Admiral said that Kate prescribed, just be able to get it working and the infrastructure requirements needed, it's almost unexecutable, and that doesn't even include Army Navy, who owns like the military, responsible for the military pieces of land out there, to turn it over to the Army Corps of Engineers to let them do that. So those discussions may have started, but to adjudicate that's going to take years. Again, all this stuff is not about delivering capability, right? This is about preparing the battle space to do it.
You got to have that to have the capability. So you can't do either or. What's your perspective on Mark's single solution of going back to basically he just, that solution he just put forward that just does one segment of the mission, but that doesn't do they're going to hit the gaps.
Yep. So fun fact, Aegis Ashore PMRF went from shovel ready to radiating from their deck house within 15 months, right? And they're doing tests within 17 months. Right. And so that is a piece of land on a military installation on an island in the middle of the Pacific. So it can be done from that timeline perspective. And that actually set the conditions, right? Because if you still look at the Pacific Missile Range Facility, it's not just the Aegis deck house. Up there on I think it's Kaina Point behind, almost the same topography as you have in Guam for a mountain ridge. There's a APY-9 a dish out there that you do testing. Well, when you start adding that radar, which is on the E-2D plus Aegis plus CEC plus a launcher that's 2.5 miles away, by the way, from the deck house, you can call that a remote launcher. You're starting to get into a construct. Well, actually, you can create not just NIFCA afloat, but NIFCA ashore when you start adding an Army effector or two.
MDA is going to have a test with VLS at the end of this year.
Yep, that's right. In a few months.
So that's happening. I'm just going back to the bigger argument. You just can't. I guess you got to start building a capability, but you have to have the whole thing. The Navy piece can't just do this by themselves. They've got to have the Army and the cruise missile defense mission and the counter UAS mission that goes with it. There's no way, right? And it seems to be we're on two different pages here, or we're reverting back. So how do you get this thing right? Or what does right look like? Is it 2031 before we have all this stuff together? Well,
so the first thing we need to do, and Admiral Montgomery mentioned, we need to take a pause and go back and look through the lens of executability on what the current architecture prescribes. So the current program of record, we need to go back and say, $60 billion, really? 60, and that's not even the total life cycle. So we start bringing in how much, like the manpower and the fight up beyond procurement and sustainment and manning, training. It's going to be astronomical, right? We know people are the most expensive piece over the long haul for these systems. So the question is going to reside is, do you want kind of a cheaper solution that's Army centric to be delivered here with limited capability, especially BMD capability, with a large Army footprint? Or do you want something a little bit more expensive with a low manpower footprint that can do missile defense, that can do hypersonic, and with an addition of Army effectors, you can do the whole package. And so that decision needs to be made. So we need to pause, take a look back on, by the way, let's go back to space. But we know that air motion track indications and is something that we know SpaceCom is working on and the Air Force is working on. So we can start doing these things from space if we're given the purpose and the prioritization and really the application of it in a real use case. So there's things that we're doing right now that if we turn it 90 degrees, we can stick it in there, and I bet you it's going to save a lot of efficiencies when it comes to the current architecture. But first and foremost, we need to go back. We need to challenge what was pushed out through PITM 1 back in presidential budget 20, I think it was 21 or 22, when the initial architecture came out.
So JD, we've had 3 combatant commanders battling for this thing, from Aquilino, Davidson to Harris, and now Pappy's got this thing now. Do you see a change from his perspective of what they can do now with Guam and make it quicker, better, faster from his, because he's the requirement guy for that system? Do you see a change in that?
It is a priority. It is one of his goals to be able to get credible defense capability on Guam. The resource and responsibilities, I think he's going to take a step back from and let those that are responsible for the fulfillment of his requirements stand up and move forward. But the requirement to provide credible defense of our premier power projection hub remains the same. That requirement's not going to go away. The fulfillment of it will be, and I don't think the commander is going to be as involved as the previous commanders on specific capabilities to be prescribed. He's going to defer it to the building to be able to, hey, you created this architecture, you're resourcing this architecture. It ain't going to be delivered in the time frame that I need. Well, even CNO Franchetti a couple of days ago released her her navigational priorities. And number one was be ready to fight China by 2027, the quote unquote Davidson window, right? So you had the Navy talking about the priority to get to get kit, to get content, to get motivated and ready for that high-end competition fight. That needs to be translated over to one of the critical assets in the Pacific.
And then the C2, the bridge that MDA is in charge of, bringing IBCS and CSC and the talk from the Air Force, that's going to be demonstrated, I believe, as well to do that. Why isn't that? That seems to be, is that working? Is that what we're going to do? Or who does that report to? The base commander? Who does that thing go to? Or does it go right back to Hawaii, to Pappy and that group?
Yeah, it depends on how the Theater Air Defense Commander, PACAV, wants to design his command and control. The JMDC bridge just allows fire control quality data to be passed from one platform to another. That is one way to pass fire control information. 15 years ago, when CEC was it, yeah, that made sense. But today, think about 5G. There's things that are happening in the commercial world that are a tenth of the price, hardware independent, and software based, that you can essentially become an app for one of the communication paths and mechanisms for the command and control. So when we talk about the JMDC bridge, that was an add-on after the baseline architecture was demonstrated, and it's a good capability. Don't get me wrong; it's been demonstrated. But when you look across the entire theater, yeah, there may be some other opportunities in content and capabilities that should be pursued.
Okay, let's we've got a couple of minutes left. Do you have the questions? I think we've got you some of the questions that were asked today. Could you answer a couple of those, or what you think? I think we've covered a lot, but let's see what else that needs to be that you could answer.
All right, let me pull them up right here. If I go dark, it's because I hit the wrong button. Go figure. There's a couple about drones and swarms. That's a force protection. That's not a Guam defense holistic. The services are responsibility for force protection of the capabilities that they present. So you're talking about fence post, fence line. In 2019, the current chairman, he said, hey, he wants the ability to defend his air bases from hypersonic to the fence line. So yeah, that requirement has been there. The mechanism to do it, that's not part of the holistic Guam defense system. That's more of a localized. Let's see what else we got in here. Hold on. Dr. Edwards had sent this a couple of days ago. He was looking at what are additional systems that are going to be brought into the architecture. Well, right now, the architecture is constrained with your major weapon systems that we've already mentioned before. To the point being, we start talking about regional I&D. There's some credible and high-end legitimate capability coming from Australia, coming from Japan. That's why we created the Allied Sensor Integration Program. The things that are coming to JADG and what that capability from the Japanese is providing is fantastic and should be ingested into a regional integrated architecture approach. Same thing with the JORN over the horizon radar. It's a fantastic capability, and both countries are pursuing space-based stuff as well. So yeah, that's that's part of the architecture that we need to look beyond just the defense of a piece of land in Guam and make it more about regional. Let's see. But no, you don't have to be. This is funny. No, you don't have to be a football player to be on this panel. I'm not going to say who submitted that, but no. Yeah, let's not get into that. Let's see. Trying to think what else. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know, but I mean that's about it. I think yeah. So moving forward, I mean, we're talking about the dilemma with respect to Guam, but yeah, as we pause and have the opportunity to kind of reassess, there's some things that I believe we should start taking into consideration down the road. At some point in time, um, we need to start thinking about what missile defense looks like with fifth and sixth generational warfare. We're talking about kinetics, non-contact, irregular warfare type coming out. I know that's not for right now. That's probably just beyond the fight for the next 4 to 5 years. But whatever we do with Guam right now, we have to be able to keep it open-ended with an open architect to be absorbed the future fight. There's concepts out there. I refer to as attritable integrated air missile defense. So what does air missile defense look like from an unmanned platform perspective? So unmanned sensors, unmanned weapons, marsupials, deploying different content out there. There's some real capability. The question is how do we take that capability and put it against the backdrop of integrated air missile defense? I talked about allied sensor data. We don't have to do it all, right? There's legitimate content out there that we need to be able to pull in and utilize. So whatever this architecture is designed, it needs to be able to draw in, and we know we can do that, right? OSD R&E through their Joint Fires Network program has successfully brought in unclassed to SAP level information in an open architecture, software-defined architecture to be able to take multiple kill chains, put it under one pane of glass, and be able to do things. They are pursuing a defensive integration piece of that as part of the next integration for JFN. I'll tell you right now, the architecture for Guam cannot interface with what the Joint Fires Network is going to be able to do. So there's going to be some mechanism to bridge the two on the pace we are right now. Again, as we pause and reflect and look forward, let's be intentional on the way we design this stuff to be able to bring in future capabilities or near-term future capabilities. The most important, Admiral Montgomery mentioned it, there's invisible consequence out there, space and cyber, that we know are applicable. That needs to be cooked into this gumbo pot for Guam defense. I'll just say the defense of Guam, when we initially created it, Riki, was not about knocking down missile threats for Guam. It was about expanding missile defense into a larger architecture and approach for a more theater and regional perspective. If you're able to do it in the Pacific, you can pick up that architecture and do it anywhere else. So I'll just pause right there for your final comments.
I agree with you, but at 60 billion, what other
big number
countries in the Pacific can do that? So we got to get that right. And I think, we didn't talk about it, but some of the joint fires or the integrated fire network is benefiting from it, or the construction is for the offensive side of things as well. That's part of this MILCON movement out there. So that price has got to come down. We can't just do one solution. That's great, right? We can do Aegis, whatever. You got to have the whole layered team play, because if you don't, they're going to hit the gaps. That's what they do. So that's got to be in play. The C2's got to be organized, deliberately assigned to move forward. You've got to bring in your allies. Your allies have got to come in. Japan, Australia, even Korea, Philippines, to support. And you should be doing an exercise there every year to support an island. And you've got to move to what this is, like you said, the hub, but we've got to be able to move quickly to defend other islands, because we cannot be a single point failure aspect of that. So I think it's good to flush this out a little bit, because I think it's been painted as a pretty rosy picture the last couple of years. We got the money, we're all going for it, everybody's rah, 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 but we got to deliver. And we haven't delivered. And if we don't deliver, it's gonna pull the fleet. They're gonna bring the ships back, and we're gonna go back to the expense of that. So I think there is time to look at it. I wouldn't say rethink. We're still going. We got to defend Guam, no matter what. No matter what, it's got to be defended, and it's got to be completely defended. So that has to happen. But we got to relook at what the lessons learned. The lessons learned to get this thing accelerated as fast as we can. And we got new leadership. We got new leadership coming. So there is some opportunity here, and I'm just thankful for you and Mark to come up from your expertise and getting the nitty gritty on this thing and truth tell on what's going on here. So thank you for this. Welcome to the team here at JD, and I appreciate the time and effort. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to our hour discussion on Guam. Thank you.